Dana White's Contender Series. This is Season 8, Episode 7. We have 5 fights lined up this Tuesday night. I'm John Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to kick things off in the women's strawweight division as Alexa Tanera is a 10-1 prospect fighting out of Brazil. She actually is a main training partner of Amanda Ribas. And of those 10 professional victories, 6 of them have actually come by submission. She seems to have a pretty well-rounded skill set, and she's actually fought a decent level of competition. She has a win over Ryan Dos Santos where she submitted her, which was very impressive. Dos Santos is a black belt, so that was definitely an impressive win there. But then a not so impressive look, her only professional loss came against Bruna Brazil. Well, okay, Brazil, she's a kickboxer, she's physical. No, she standing guillotined Tanera. So it was a terrible look for her there. That was her only professional loss. And on the feet, she has like a wild striking style. It's a lot of like looping, crazy, like Davy Grant style of looping hook shots. And she definitely gets reckless as well. But she's shown that she could land takedowns if she needs to. She's an opportunistic submission grappler. The only negative is that just as she can land takedowns, she can give them up just as easily. Now, on the flip side, Rose Conceição is a 7-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Brazil as well, and she's the former LFA strawweight champion. She's also a 3-time Brazilian wrestling champion, so she has that high-level wrestling to fall back on, and that's how she's won most of her fights on the regional scene. But you saw that title fight in her last fight where she was facing a kickboxer. She actually, for starters, she opened up southpaw, which she normally is not a southpaw. She can fight comfortably from both stances. That was more of just a matchup thing. But she also made it a point to show off her striking. She did not look to wrestle that much, and she actually was taken down 3 or 4 times in that fight. So just like Tanera, despite her being a super high-level wrestler, she can give up takedowns as well. But her cardio seems on point. The striking is still developing, and it's improving. And I do think she's the more likely of the two with that Brazilian wrestling background. She's the more likely to end up in top position and ride out some control time. So I'm going to side with her here. The odds aren't yet out for this card, but I do expect her to be a moderate to large favorite here. It's just a matter of how big of a favorite is she, because if it gets too wide, I do think Tanera is at least live enough to be competitive in some spots to where if the line gets crazy, I don't mind taking a stab on the underdog. But the official pick is going to be Conceição by decision. She's going to kick things off in the DGen parlay. Which brings us to our next matchup. This one's in the featherweight division as Kevin Vallehos takes on Cam Teague. And again, the odds aren't out yet, but I do expect the Vallehos to be the favorite in this matchup. He's somebody that we saw fight last season on the Contender Series. That was actually his first professional loss, and I don't want to rate him too harshly because despite losing as a favorite in that spot, he went against somebody that clearly the market did not price in accurately. It was Gene Silva, who now is an absolute world beater at the UFC level. So clearly that fight was mispriced, and I don't want to knock Vallehos too hard because he just ran into a buzzsaw. You know, this is a 22-year-old kid with a very well-rounded skill set, solid striking on the feet, really sharp leg kicks, has shown that he can land takedowns as well. He's got power. 9 of his 13 wins have come by knockout, and his cardio checks out as well. He can carry that power and that pace for 15 minutes if he needs to. But again, he just ran into a buzzsaw in Gene Silva that was able to tag him multiple times and hurt him. I don't think that's going to be the case here against Cam Teague, who's a 7-0 prospect fighting out of Alabama. And of his 7 victories, 4 of them have come by knockout. He's actually coming off his most recent fight. He knocked out Austin Lingo, which is a nice feather in his cap. Austin Lingo previously fought in the UFC. In terms of his skill set, though, Cam Teague is just a really big featherweight. He stands at 6 feet tall. He's very big and long for the division, but he doesn't really use his length all that well. He's definitely more of a striker. I would say a one-dimensional striker because the bits of grappling that we've seen from him, I do not think this guy can grapple. I don't think he's interested in grappling. Maybe it doesn't play a role in this fight, but it is, kind of a red flag for me in terms of what he wants to do. He just wants to get inside and trade. He wants to fight in the phone booth and wing some heavy shots until somebody drops. And while that's exciting, it's just very reckless, especially when you're going up against somebody that's younger, that might be more durable, who ate a bunch of big shots from Gene Silva. And we've seen Teague rocked on the regional scene multiple times as well. So it's one where I favor Vallehos even in that kind of high variance, fight in the phone booth type of matchup. But also if he fights smart and implements the takedowns, I think he looks like a pretty big favorite here. So we're going to side with Vallehos. Vallehos by TKO. That's the official pick. And our next matchup's in the light heavyweight division as Kevin Christian takes on Francesco Mazzeo. And we'll start on the Christian side. He's an 8-2 prospect fighting out of Brazil. And of those 8 victories, 4 have come by knockout, 4 have come by submission. He's actually only fought into the second round 3 times in his career, and he was finished in 2 of those fights. So this guy, honestly, I think the cardio looks pretty rough. In terms of everything else, he's huge for the division, very long at 6'7". He's got a huge frame, but he doesn't really use it all that effectively. Sure, he's got some power in his hands, some powerful kicks as well. Definitely an athlete. I believe he plays soccer professionally as well. I could be wrong on that. And he holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But in terms of his style on the feet, he is primarily a counter striker. And a lot of times with these guys that like to sit back and wait for the big counter, they're very low volume, low activity. And even though he's not pushing a huge pace in some of these fights, he does seem to get pretty tired and the volume drops off even more so. And the last thing I'll say about him is he's got that typical tall man defense where they kind of just leave their chin way up high, and he also relies primarily on head movement, which you don't love to see at the bigger weight classes because usually they're not quick enough to do that, and we've seen him kind of get tagged and pay that price a couple times. And on the flip side here, Francesco Mazzeo, this is a guy who was originally being brought in to be showcased against Philip Latu a couple weeks ago. He had to get bumped a couple weeks. We saw Navajo Sterling end up getting the replacement there. So now he's back. He definitely was more of the A side in that Latu matchup, and I think he's being billed as the A side in this matchup as well. Both guys very low level. Even Mazzeo, only 4 professional fights. He previously fought over in Cage Warriors, and he is basically just like a big juice head. Like, the dude looks like he's on steroids. He hits like he's on steroids. In terms of his skill set, he's really just a one-dimensional power striker, and I expect that's going to be the game plan here against Kevin Christian. Maybe Christian can mix in some grappling. I'm not super convinced that he's going to look to do it or have much success doing it. I think either guy is capable of hurting each other, but I'm going to side with the guy who I think is more dangerous, more powerful, and going to be putting more volume out there as well, and that's going to be the Italian in Francesco Mazzeo. Mazzeo by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next matchup in the welterweight division as Daniel Franza takes on Vadim Ceci. And this is one where you have Franza coming off his LFA fight where he was an underdog and he ended up coming through with a big knockout victory there. And that's really what he is. He's an 8-2 prospect fighting out of Romania, and most of his wins have come by knockout, and that's really his style. He is a powerful counter striker, knockout threat. He doesn't really have much else to his game. In fact, he's actually been submitted in both of his professional losses, and he's really just looking to trade big shots, and we have seen him kind of get hurt as well. He was actually dropped in his last fight, and that's just something that concerns me, in that his style is really just, waiting for that big shot counter. So similar to Kevin Christian, where it's usually less activity. So unless he's landing that big shot, I kind of struggle in terms of the minute winning ability. And on the flip side, Vadim Ceci, this is a guy who trains at Extreme Couture in Las Vegas with Sean Strickland, a bunch of other well-known UFC fighters. He's 17-1 fighting out of Belarus, and of those 17 victories, 12 of them have come inside the distance, and he seems to be a very well-rounded prospect. The striking is on point. He's got sharp leg kicks as well. He's also shown the ability to land takedowns if he needs to, even though I wouldn't count on him to do that consistently. And he's actually coming off a win over former UFC fighter Ismail Nardiev. The only thing is he was hurt in that fight himself. He was dropped before he ended up coming back, and that fight was 2 years ago. So it's been quite quite long layoff, to be honest, and I just don't fully trust the durability. So this is a matchup that I actually struggled with, because on one hand, I think either guy's capable of hurting each other, and I actually think Ceci, his durability is more of an issue, so I have some concerns there, especially if we expect him to open up as the favorite here, coming off a 2-year layoff, sketchy durability. But I keep going back to the skill set, and I do think training at a better camp has the more well-rounded skill set. I expect him to be putting more volume out there and potentially has a little bit of grappling upside too. I gotta side with him here. I just don't feel great about it, so it's going to depend on, you know, where the line opens up at to see if I get fully involved outside of the DGen parlay. But the pick is going to be Ceci by TKO, which brings us to our main event. This one's in the heavyweight division as Felder takes on Danilo Vkin, and we'll start on the Felder side. He's a 5-0 undefeated prospect. He's the former CFFC heavyweight champion, and this dude is very athletic. And no, I know what you're thinking. He looks exactly like Tanner Boser. That is not Tanner Boser. That's Felder. And he's very athletic. He comes from a high school state champion wrestling background, and he also played football at the University of Minnesota. So this guy is a clear athlete, and he also has a pretty solid skill set. He moves very well for the heavyweight division because he's one of those lighter guys, light on his feet, solid striking, decent volume, and has that wrestling to fall back on. He just seems like a pretty well-rounded, despite being green and still needing some experience against better competition. He has a win over Velasco, who previously fought on Contender Series. So he's fought some guys, but I still think he continuously needs a little bit more experience, although I think his base is pretty solid. And on the flip side, Vkin, this guy, I'm not sure is even a real fighter, to be honest with you. He's a 6-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Ukraine, and as we've seen in the past, sometimes these Ukrainian regional fighters, very, very sketchy. You watch some of his fights, from what you can see, like he fought this one dude that looked like he was 600 pounds, total slob, ended up beating him inside of like a minute. He's never fought into the second round. So we have serious questions with the level of competition. We have serious questions with the cardio. We have serious questions with the grappling. He's a BJJ blue belt, but you haven't really seen him grapple a ton. And he comes from like a combat sambo background. But again, the level of people that he's fighting on the Ukrainian regional scene, I'm just not sure is going to translate to this level, you know, especially against somebody that is so athletic, that is so well-rounded, and has fought better competition over in CFFC, like Felder. So it's one where I think Felder is likely going to be a pretty big favorite here, but I do think it ends up probably being warranted, and I think he gets the job done. We'll say it's Felder by TKO. That's the official pick, and he's going to round things out in the DGen parlay. So to recap for the DGen parlay, in the first fight of the night, the female fight, I got my girl Rose Conceição. I just think she's going to be the better wrestler here. I think that ends up being the difference. I think she's more likely to spend time in dominant position. So unless Tanera can pull off some sort of sneaky submission, I think she likely gets out decision here, outpointed, and Conceição gets her hand raised. We're going with her in the first fight. In the second fight, we're going with my guy Kevin Vallehos. They're bringing him back this year. He gets a much better opponent for him. He's not facing a killer in Gene Silva. Even though Teague has that reckless style, I just think he's going to be outclassed here in multiple areas. I'm going with the young kid to get the job done. In the third fight of the night, I think both of these guys are very low level. If Kevin Christian somehow proves me wrong and gets a contract here, I will eat crow and I'll probably laugh, because I do not think this guy is anywhere near UFC caliber. I'm not convinced Mazzeo is either, just 4-0 Cage Warriors prospect, but he's the more dangerous striker of the two, and I think that's going to pay off and be the difference. So we're going with him in the third fight. In the fourth fight of the night, I have concerns with the layoff. I have concerns with the durability of Vadim, but I just do think he's the much better fighter in terms of the overall skill set, whereas Franza is really just a one-dimensional counter striker, and I think that ends up being the difference here. We'll say it's Ceci by TKO, and then of course in the main event, we're going with my guy, the athlete, the former state champion wrestler, the former Gopher football player. We're going with Felder, the former CFFC heavyweight champion. He gets his hand raised and sends Vkin back to the Ukrainian regional scene, and that's going to do it for the DGen parlay. As always, guys, appreciate you watching. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next week.